This is Still Here, Still Queer, Now What? Your companion to queer midlife. I'm Dr. Paul Taylor-Pitt. I'm the author of Still Here, Still Queer, Now What? The book, coming everywhere, 21st of October. My guest today on the pod, I'm very excited to welcome Avi Ben-Zeev, who you're going to get to know wonderfully in this conversation. When we sat down to talk, I asked Avi to introduce himself, and he does it in such a wonderful way, better than I ever could. But I just want to offer my take on Avi and how we got to know each other. So I met Avi through Queer Write, which is a writing group that I've been part of for the last, coming up for about 6 years, I think. Queer Write meets once a week on a Monday evening virtually. It's organized by Caprice, who has been doing this for a long time and is amazing at pulling people together. And I was very fortunate to meet Avi, and he's become a friend and someone I look up to, and someone who I think just shows up in the world with dignity and grace in a way that I find particularly inspiring. Avi is the author of this book. It's called Calling My Dead Name Home, The Trans Bear Diaries. It's an amazing book. We talk about it on the podcast. And we also talk a bit about what happened last year. Avi's book was longlisted for the Polari Prize, and the whole thing just disintegrated, basically. You can find out more about it in the conversation. I thought it was important to give Avi the space to talk about his experience of it, because even though the conversation ended up being a lot about transphobia, trans rights, trans inclusion, trans exclusion, as the only trans author on the long list, Avi's voice was not really asked for or heard. So we talk a bit about that. We talk about how he came to be who he is. We talk about what it's like for him now in his 60s and what might come next. It's just a fantastic conversation. So please sit back and enjoy. Avi, for people who have been living in a cave and have not heard of you, how would you want people to meet you?
Which is most people, not the cave. And I don't expect most people to know me. How would I like people to meet me? I'm going to say something actually quite cliche. I think as a fellow human, first and foremost, but having said that, with, certain dimensions that may actually be unexpected, because, you and I spoke about labels. So I could definitely list a few labels, right? So I can say, meet me as X, I, Z, right? Like queer, trans, writer, psychology professor. But really, those labels, while somewhat informative, would reduce me into some kind of, one-dimensional, maybe two-dimensional, but I don't know if it's quite three-dimensional being. So I think, somebody who is, I guess, in quite the beginning phases of Act 3 in life. Maybe that's how I want people to meet me.
In a way, the two different ways of describing yourself, one, fellow human, just immediately places you in amongst everyone else, like we are all just here as humans. But then even as you start, I was imagining playing a game of Guess Who, queer, trans, psychology professor, writer. I'd be like, I wonder if at what point we just come to you as the only expression of this in the whole world, like going from all of humanity to there are certain labels that mean you are the answer to all of those things. And I think even those 4 that you said already probably narrow it down quite a lot. Have you met any other queer, trans, writer, professors of psychology?
There are some. I don't know if quite writer and professor, but I think, if you want kind of the maximum Venn diagrams of all like these different labels and of course we know that the sum is larger than the parts, right? And so again, like it's an interesting exercise, but I think in terms of who am I, if we go from the broad fellow human facing mortality, which I think actually is quite profound for most of us, to something kind of more unique, intersectional being, I think maybe then the thing that individuates me on some level is that I am the epitome on some level of a nomadic Jew. And I think because, and other people I'm sure can relate to it, and the idea is that people can relate to it regardless. I hope so. That's why I'm a psychologist. That's why I'm a writer, is that I hope that my story can connect to others, and actually while being very specific and being very granular and being very, hopefully rich with details, but ultimately it's both specific and universal, right? And so What do I mean by nomadic Jew? I was born and raised in Israel, which is a place that, is very heated. Even just the word Israel will probably send a shiver down many people's spines, or the opposite for some people, right? But it's very loaded. I, grew up in a small town. It was a small working class town surrounded by a lot of right wing people. And I, refused to buy into it. I had some influences. I got into good trouble, as they say, politically as well. And I refused to serve in the Israeli Defense Forces. So I left the country as a traitor. And once I left the country, in a way, I rejected the so-called home that I was born into, and that's complex in and of itself, right? And then you can hear from my accent that I sound American. It's because I lived for over 30 years in the US, predominantly actually on the West Coast, East and West Coast. So I think if you want to get into this again, like the very individuating aspect is that I'm not a person who feels like I belong to a particular place. And the history of the Jews, for example, even though I'm not religious and I'm definitely pro-Palestinian, if it's not clear from what I said already, I feel like there's something about us that has not been talked about, that we've never been accepted anywhere that we've lived. And there's a fundamental, in a way, lack of belonging in that way. But there's a sense of belonging that I derive from the people in my life and for certain aspects of cultures. For example, I've been in London for 5 years. I see London as the place I'd like to stay. So I definitely am connected to London, to the UK, and I'd like to contribute to London and the UK. I feel that that's part of what home means, but it's not the home. I don't think there is such a thing as the home. So maybe, I'm a fellow human facing mortality, trying to make meaning of this existence and belonging, despite having fundamental, aspects of myself that don't belong. And I think it's true, again, of us who are queer or different, that we kind of create our own belonging in our own homes, including within our bodies as we age. So this aspect is very intriguing to me. And again, I don't know that would make me unique. I think certain aspects of what I'm telling you now do make me unique. And that's why I wrote a memoir, because I felt that there were enough unique things in there too. To kind of bring people maybe into a story they haven't quite heard before. But the idea is for people to connect with that story. I mean, that's my fondest wish. So yeah, it's like at the same time, fellow human, at the same time, unique story. One doesn't contradict the other in my mind.
There's a uniqueness that I see in you, and also that I think I learned from reading your memoir, that there are very few aspects of you that aren't heated. And maybe increasingly so, I don't know. Or I guess my sense is increasingly so. Like I think in the UK, it's harder than it was to be a Jew and feel safe. And it's harder to be pro-Palestinian and feel safe. And it's harder to be queer and be safe. And it's harder to be trans and be safe. Like I think a lot of the aspects of who you are heated. And yet you seem, to me anyway, to be able to handle that heat. Like it doesn't, I don't see you wanting to turn it down.
That's lovely, Paul. I mean, I'm really sitting with what you just said, and it's very affirming and gorgeous to hear. So thank you. No, I don't want to hide any of those identities. And in fact, I've lately gotten some t-shirts that actually have the word, trans on them, which normally I wouldn't, because to me, it's, yes, I'm trans, but it's part of a bigger story, right? It's not like, hi, I'm Avi, I'm trans. Now you understand everything about me. No, not at all. But I think it came from this desire to be a little bit more visible, because for many trans men, especially, I mean, we tend to pass, and passing is not necessarily something that people want. Some people want it, some people don't. And for me, I like it in the terms of that it aligns with how I experience my gender, but it's not because I want to hide, which again is legitimate. In a lot of places, it's very dangerous to be trans. So there's nothing shameful about wanting to hide. But for me personally, yes, it's important to be out. And I see that actually as a form of activism, even though activists who call themselves activists should be very suspect. But I think other people should call us that. We shouldn't call ourselves that. But in my head, yeah, if I think about how can I contribute to the world in whatever ways I can. I think being out is important because so many people are having conversations about trans folks now without knowing anyone trans. So yeah, I think that's important, but it can be exhausting too. I mean, especially in a medical context.
I have
Yeah, it's really raining. Actually, I may have to close the door. Is that okay? Can I disappear from the screen for a second? Because you're going to edit, right?
anyway, because I just got distracted because there's someone standing right outside my window, but maybe he's
What?
just from the rain.
Oh
It was like this looming figure. Look, you see that figure? This looming.
my God.
I'm just going to go and like have a
Yeah,
nose.
yeah, please. I'm going to. Is somebody there?
I think he's just sheltering from the rain, so I'm not going to be hurt. Let's get off my. It's like shelter away as long as he doesn't
Okay.
start like making a noise.
God.
I think a lot and don't come to any conclusions about the exclusion of trans men in a lot of those conversations where people are talking about trans people. And on one hand, I want to say, well, why are trans men being ignored? This is not okay. You're excluding a whole bunch of people. And then I also think, no, just don't talk, don't leave them out of it. Talk about anything. You know, it's like I find this tension between kind of going, why is this conversation about trans people actually mainly about trans women? It feels very like, oh, let's just erase all trans men. But equally, I don't want to then go, well, let's talk about trans men, because it's almost like, no, just why would I drag anyone else into this fucking toxic cesspit of a conversation? And so what you say about visibility, I think for me is there's an importance in terms of people recognizing that the conversation about trans people is firstly massively awful. And secondly, only half of the picture. Would you rather be included or not in that conversation? Like, it's what a horrible position to be in where you're like, we're not being talked about. Thank fuck we're not being talked about.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's complex. So I think it's okay. So in terms of I guess it depends on the discussion. So I think the discussion about, violence against trans people, because trans women and especially trans women of color are the ones who experience the most violence. In those contexts, I'm okay with trans men maybe not being highlighted or not given equal weight. I think it's still important to mention that trans men do incur violence and we should talk about it. But I think, yes, I think if the spotlight is on trans women, especially trans women of color, to me, that makes sense. When we talk more broadly about trans rights and what it's like to be trans, I think it's really important to include trans men. And the fact that, for example, trans men are ignored with the whole toilet issues, which is, the whole EHRC guidelines, which are horrific. When trans men are actually excluded from that conversation, it's a convenient thing for people who are, so-called gender critical, which I think is such a euphemism for transphobic. Yeah, gender critical gives them some kind of gravitas, the label, which is horrific. But imagine that, now with the new guidelines, I'm supposed to go to the women's toilets, right? So imagine me going to the women's toilets. Imagine how that's received, right? But if these are the guidelines, then you can think that cis men who want to rape women, because that's usually who rapes women, can just go in and say, I'm trans. According to, it's consistent with the guidelines. But because they don't take us into account, they don't even think about that they're actually creating this fertile ground for cis men to go in and say, hey, I'm trans. And again, nobody would do that because that's not how women incur violence.
Yeah.
Women incur a lot of violence. Yes. And women should be protected from that violence. But because the idea is not to create, obviously, I don't have to, so many people know this. I feel like I'm preaching to the converted, but this transphobia is just that. It's not about protecting women. It's about using us as scapegoats, very much like, Jews were accused of poisoning the wells or drinking the blood of Christian babies. So, it's similar, right? It's like gives people an enemy within this kind of feared, monstrous enemy that looks, maybe some people who even look like they're one of us and really harbor dangerous, aggressive, cruel, dehumanized aspects. So yeah, I think that's what it is. And so I think the visibility of trans men could be important in that discourse, because it shows how ridiculous it is. And also, I think what needs to be discussed more and more is inclusion of trans men in queer and gay male spaces. And
Yeah.
I think that, to me, is largely missing from the discourse, and how to humanize that. Because, from my experience, because that's who I tend to date and play with, are mostly, I mean, some trans men as well, but mostly cis men, mostly queer and gay cis men. It feels like that conversation, that wheel has to be, reinvented in every one of those conversations, which is okay. Like, I don't blame any one individual for, feeling maybe a little nervous or not knowing. That's totally humanizing, and it can sometimes be endearing, but it's missing from kind of the general culture.
Yeah. And I think when it does pop up, like in queer culture and queer spaces, I know that it doesn't exist in London anymore, thankfully. Like I remember XXL nightclub a few years back kind of said, we don't want men turning up in heels. And it started off, I think, just as a bit of like, femme shaming. And then it became quite misogynist. And then they kind of, as people do, then tended to double down and were like, and we don't want trans men here. And it's like, oh, fuck off. But then part of me goes, okay, well, at least you've shown yourself.
That's
I
true.
know who I'm up against.
Yeah.
And other spaces, like places like Beef Mince or Hunter, who say, yeah, trans men are men. They are welcome in a men only space. I go, okay, you've shown yourself. I'm really happy to support. And it's awful that it should be like that. But I think we are in this space of mediocre people making really bad decisions about stuff. And the people who are making good decisions feeling then sometimes quite vulnerable for that, sometimes quite attacked for it. That's the only way that change happens, is when people take a bit of a courageous stand and go, actually, yeah, we're not complying. We're not doing. It takes me, I mean, we haven't even talked about age yet. And but equally, I'm happy to park that for now and come back to it. Because one of the things I was really mindful of was last year's Polari Prize. And I have your book here, which I recommend all the time. And I always go into bookshops and like move it on the shelf and like So your book, Calling My Dead Name Home, The Transphobia Diaries. I mean, I think this is an amazing book. And I also listened to the audiobook, and it was so great hearing you read it to me. And I was really excited for you when it was shortlisted for the Polari Prize. And then the Polari Prize disintegrated in front of our eyes. And, I guess most people listening to this might know already, but there was a transphobic author included on the shortlist. And a number of people who were on the shortlist said, well, I refuse to be part of this. There was a lot of people who then wanted to boycott the prize. And you were one of the few people who said, no, I'm staying, which I thought was, I mean, what, a boss move. What made you stay when it seemed like other people were leaving? But also they were the people who weren't necessarily trans or affected by this in some way. I mean, everyone's affected, but I just think it was such a killer move as a trans writer to go, no, I'm not going anywhere.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So it's almost a year since that happened. So I feel a little bit more calm when I speak about it, because it did evoke quite a bit of emotion, you can imagine. And thank you so much for the kind words about the book. And that means a lot. Yeah. So it was a great honor. I've run into you in some of the Polari events. I mean, I've been going for a while. I love that we had a prize that celebrated queer writers. I mean, how wonderful was that? And, there was quite a bit of celebration in those events and community. And so when I got the news that I was longlisted, amongst some writers that I really admire, I mean, that was incredible. That was such a happy, wonderful moment, especially since one of the transitions, the many transitions, not just gender, that I've gone through in life has been from being a psychology professor to a writer. And I thought, wow, I'm here. I'm queer. I'm here. Now what? I'm in Polari. So that was a gorgeous, beautiful, moving, humbling moment. What happened next was the opposite of that. Quite shocking, actually. So we know that one of the authors was overtly transphobic, who was longlisted.
How
Yeah, and he actually, in an interview in a newspaper, so in his own words, called himself a turf. And I forget the exact wording now. Maybe I'm just repressing it, but it was something like a proud turf or something along those lines. And And for someone on that list of what's supposed to be such an inclusive celebration of queer writing and community, for somebody to have said that so explicitly was shocking. And I completely understand why people went into an uproar. So there are two lists for the Polari. There's people who wrote their first book. So that's one list, and that they're the ones who initially became way more active and loud around that. And so it's kind of emerging, list. And then there's the other list that was on for people already published. And so, yeah, so that's where the uproar started coming, is from the people who were recognized for their first novel. And I think it was wonderful that they spoke, and they were really, really loud about the fact that Polari should have essentially, what's the word? I'm looking for a kind word. Ask that person, made that person step down, withdrew, that Polari withdrew that nomination. So that was initially the uproar. And this is where I think Polari could have done better. Because if there was a statement, because my understanding, without getting into the nitty gritty of it, my understanding was that withdrawing that person had some legal issues. But even if that was the case, there should have been some acknowledgement. We do not condone transphobia. Something. And that was very poorly communicated. And so because that, and also they took their sweet time in responding. And because of that, things spiraled and people started leaving. Right? And that's a nuclear option, right? And sometimes it's the right option, and sometimes it's not the right option, right? Because nuclear options, while they make a statement, do they really contribute to change? Like, what's our goal? Do we want to sink Polari so it will never happen again? Or do we want to confront Polari in such a way that Polari would reinvent itself as being more intentionally and responsibly trans inclusive and actually intolerant of not just transphobia, but any denial of human rights? Because a proud TERF, or whatever that phrase was, means I don't see you as human. I don't believe in your existence. So Polari, it would have been an opportunity for Polari. So do I think the nuclear option, am I for it? I think because of the lack of response, adequate response, and the lack of timeliness, I think the people should have stepped down eventually. It happened a little too fast. My desire around that was, let's get together and make demands and actually use this as an opportunity to stay for a while, use it as an opportunity to put pressure, make change, keep Polari, but maybe have the director step down. I'm not sure, but let's talk about it. The problem that was that very few people bothered to ask me how I felt. And I was the only trans author. And I was like, don't you want to know how I feel? I mean, you don't have to go by how I feel. I don't represent the whole trans community, but it became about people doing what they thought was right, which is commendable, but also people, to some extent, virtue signaling as well, if we're real about it. It's not one or the other. So I don't want to sound extreme when I say it, because I believe that some people did it because they actually 100% believed that they were doing the right thing, and it came from a really beautiful, passionate, wholesome place. But I think for some people, it was not well thought out. And I think to me, and I stayed because I thought, here's a bully on the playground. When I was young, and I was really young because I was an odd kid, I was bullied on the playground. Right? And here is a bully on the playground. And so my vantage point as the only trans author was, I'm not going to let that bully, beat me up, or make me go away, or make me afraid or fearful. I'm going to be in the playground, that's it. I'm staying and I'm playing in here. This is my space. So I think for me as a trans person, that made sense. But I got different responses, including some really horrible responses as well.
Really?
Yeah. Some really good ones, people who were very supportive. And then I got responses like, you're betraying the trans community, or, like you're staying because you want, you're choosing quote unquote fame. I mean, what fame really? And at that point, it was so tainted for me. The prize was tainted because if I were to be shortlisted, it was because I was trans. I mean, maybe it was because of the book. So to me, the prize lost all value. The act of staying was purely because I wasn't going to leave and let someone who doesn't believe in my rights to exist win, because that would have meant they won. And at the end, they won. The TERFs won. The nuclear option didn't change anything, but it was unavoidable.
It just burns the house down for everyone.
I think so. But the directors of Polari at the end, I'm sorry, contributed to that in a big way. Like, they were very wrong in their response. They shouldn't have done what they did, which is, let's hide under the table. Let's just hope this kind of blows over. I mean, to me, that's an act of transphobia on behalf of the Polari directors. Yes. To eventually, and maybe at the beginning I can see there was all these, again, legal issues where they couldn't have just dismissed that person. I get it, because I've had long discussions with the directors. So I get that there was to some extent, they were really worried about legal action, but that's not an excuse to not be very loud about disagreeing with transphobia and TERF ideology. I don't know if it's ideology. It's like, yeah, it's prejudice. And yeah.
I mean, I was just so disappointed that you were robbed of the opportunity to win on your own terms in the way that people have for the history of the Polari Prize. I just felt so cheated on your behalf. And I think it's fascinating that no one asked you how you were doing. Again, it's another example of let's have a conversation about trans people without talking to any trans people. And I think the way you handled it was with incredible grace. In the statement that you made about why you were staying, you were very supportive of people who chose to leave because you wanted to support their decision and you wanted it to be recognized that it was your choice to stay. I think you handled that with it's that thing, isn't it? When you see someone behaving badly, how powerful it is to refuse to behave in a similar way. And yet, I feel like everybody lost. There were no winners in that situation, other than the people who always win, which is the people who we should be really angry at in the first place. It's like,
I
okay,
think so.
another prize has gone. We've lost something. And, the general transphobic white male population sits back and goes, they did it to themselves. They didn't even need to intervene. And it just feels awful. And I know it's such a, in the history of time, we will look back on it and go, did we learn anything from that? But it still feels to me quite raw and real because I don't know what's happening this year. I don't know if they're coming back. Are they? What's going on? There's a lot of questions around it. And I think you handled yourself with such dignity that I would hope that if it does come back, that there's a conversation with you about how you think it should then come back.
Thank you for that. It's interesting. I haven't been in touch with anyone from Polari. And I also want to add, there was one writer in particular. Well, actually, there were two writers who did get in touch with me and did ask about how I was doing. So it wasn't, it was mostly the writers that organized didn't get in touch with me at all, organized the walkout. But there were, just want to say, there were at least two writers that were, did check in. So I think that was really beautiful. Yeah, it's, I don't know what to say about Polari now. I hope that, there would be more and more feedback from trans folks. If they are going to continue, then I wish for it to be genuinely more inclusive. And also, I would love to see a genuine statement of, values and core beliefs come out of that organization and that's not just lip service, not just how do we look and how should we look and how should we sound, but something very genuine and some sense of accountability, because there was no accountability, really. There was lip service accountability. So I'm a big believer, and maybe that's why I chose professions that are not necessarily the highest paying, let's say, right? I think to me, what makes life worth living is connecting authentically, to oneself, to people around us, to the world, and to do that and to open the heart. And even when it's vulnerable, maybe especially when things are vulnerable. So for me, that's why living is worthwhile. And what happened, what all the political aspect of what happened is the opposite of that. So how can we use this opportunity as a way to think about what do we do with for example, transphobes within our communities, people who are TERF aligned. How do we deal with that? And as we, like I was talking to a really sweet trans guy and we were talking about issues of inclusion. So what does it actually mean to include trans people, right? And he said, I hate the word inclusion. I hate that we're included. And I said, say more. And he said, well, what do you mean? Like, thank you for including me. Shouldn't I be there to begin with? Right? He was like, fuck inclusion. Fuck that word. Now, I believe in inclusion, don't get me wrong, but I think it's the way in which it's said and the spirit in which it's said, right? So if the spirit what said is, yeah, sure, we'll include you. It's kind of like what you're talking about, gay and queer male spaces and their kind of attitudes toward trans men. It's not just what's written on paper. It's like the actual energy of it, right? The actual values. It's not even about inclusion, really. It's about who are we?
And I just want to reflect two words that you said, which I think have, and I can't stop thinking about them because in some ways it's just broken my mind open in a lovely way. Because for me, one of the, maybe the only positive thing for me anyway, that came out of that whole Polari experience was it gave me the chance to reflect on my relationship with inclusion, with the word inclusion. Because what I was, and I know it's always a bad thing to be on social media. What I saw on social media, particularly from the transphobes, was they were holding up the word inclusion in the Polari Prize values and saying, well, you have to include this author because you're inclusive.
Mm.
I was thinking, God, why is the word that's supposed to protect us being used to beat us up? And what it gave me the opportunity to do was to think about what inclusion means to me. And inclusion is not unconditional. Inclusion is not something I offer to people who want to harm members of the community. And what you just said there was you said responsible inclusion. And I feel like you should immediately trademark that and write a paper on it. I think that it applies a criteria to inclusion, which goes beyond the thing that we set ourselves up wide open, which is, well, you have to include everyone. No, we fucking don't. And if we're looking at what responsible inclusion means, to me, that means we include people who are not coming in to kick the shit out of our community. I think there's something about responsibility that feels lacking in a lot of these conversations. And I think you nailed it. I don't know if it was just like a thing that came out of your mouth because it's just there in your brain, but I just want you to name it and own it.
That's so
Make
sweet.
my to it.
That's so sweet. But it's not I think I'm echoing, the kind of stuff I've been soaking in around this. And yeah, like, who are we, right? So when we say we, who are we? So it's who's part of us in the space that we're creating. Right. So if it's like, this is a literary prize for queer people. So who are we, the queer people that are part of that prize? And in terms of, yeah, I think the Polari idea of inclusion of people with various beliefs, I mean, that is so horrific, right? Because in the name of that, atrocities have been committed, right? And so gender critical people do not hold ideologies that we need to include. Gender critical people essentially don't believe in basic human rights for trans people. So do we really want to include, queer authors who probably just call themselves gay and are kind of really, I've been thinking about deeply as a psychologist too, like why would, a very famous, successful, queer, gay, whatever author be a proud TERF? What's the psychological explanation for it, right? But we can go into that later if you're interested. But I think this idea that I can say that I don't believe in the existence of trans people, to me, automatically that means you're not part of the we. Because the we includes trans people as a fiber, as part of the fiber of who we are. So you're essentially, we can agree to disagree. What is that famous quote, right? I can agree to disagree with you unless you deny my basic rights to exist. So that's where I think the hard line is between who's part of the spaces that are the we spaces. And that can be made, I think, very simple as a statement. Right? If you're denying anyone's right to exist, you should not be part of this group. You can be part of a gender critical group if you want. It's a democracy.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, go. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can be inclusive. Yeah, include other very bigoted people. If you want to belong and that's your way of finding fulfillment and meaning and joy in life, namaste, right? Go be part of go be on people's yachts and who shall not be named and enjoy your bigotry. That's for you to do. That has nothing to do with me. But do you come into our queer spaces? The answer is hell no.
And you talked about the psychology of it, which I am interested in, particularly from a professor of psychology, because my kind of pop psychology take on it is that the bullies that you see in the playground actually get a lot out of playing the victim. They love pretending they are the ones being hurt through their actions,
Yes.
being a bully.
Yes.
What's your take on what someone, and I know this is a big question, and I would love your thoughts rather than putting you as a spokesperson on this.
Yeah.
It's so complex, but I would love to know your thoughts on why a gay man would describe himself as a proud ter.
Okay. So I actually thought about it quite a bit, including being inspired by some of the literature in psychology that speaks to it. I don't know of a particular study that studied that. Maybe it exists, but I'm unaware of it. But there's definitely a body of literature that I think we can use to think about this. So I'm talking specifically about cis gay men, okay, who essentially are proud turfs, meaning they don't really believe trans people are real, whatever, fill in the blank. They don't believe in their human rights. They should be banned from toilets that reflect their true gender. They should go with their assigned gender, all that stuff. And I think it comes down to masculinity. I think there's a masculinity threat. So someone like that particular author, again, should not be named, authors like him, let's put it that way. I don't want to target him because, he's not somebody I know, and who knows what his story is. But people like him, let's put it that, men like him, which we encounter quite a bit actually in queer community. They are afraid of what they see as femininity in men. So deep down, I think they're very insecure about their sense of masculinity. And
That made them a target in the first place. Like, that's the thing that was maybe what they got bullied for, was being...
I think so. I think that might be the actual bullying, because if you think about it, the discourse is primarily about, like you said, trans women, right? And the discourse is about trans women who don't pass, right? That's who people have in their head. They have, so the TERFs believe that essentially trans women aren't women, they're men, right? They're men who dress in this very feminizing way. Well, what does that remind you of? Stereotypes about gay men, the good old homophobia back in the day. That and if there are two men together in a relationship, one has to be the woman and one has to be, all that old outdated thing we haven't thought about in decades, luckily, especially if we live in London and or San Francisco or all these places. But that was all alive and well, that rhetoric, and that rhetoric actually exists still in the shunning of femininity. And you even you mentioned it to begin with, right, in our beginning of our conversation. And I think there's a lot of gay men out there who are afraid of being that image of the trans woman as a man in drag who's predatory, perverted. That's what gay men were portrayed as back in the day. So that archetype, am I that? Will people see me as that? I need to, and I'm not saying me as Avi, I'm saying me as, that kind of very threatened, masculinity threatened cis gay man, usually white. Wow, is that how I'm seen? That there is something there. There's an archetype there of homosexuality gone wrong. So I need to denounce those men who are dressed like women or feminine and predatory and pervy. Like, I'm not them. Don't mistake me for one of them.
Because if I separate myself from them, then I'm safe from the bullies.
Yes.
I'm on there.
I'm the normal. I'm the normal. And not only am I the normal gay man who is, masculine, I'm also siding with you against trans people, which gives me point for being normal. Like, it's very much like, accept me heterosexual world, accept me heteronormative world, accept me homonormative world. Because if I hate trans people, let's all hate them together. And also, I'm really hating the femininity in myself, because again, most people think about trans women when they think trans.
I remember, it's not about this, but it raises a similar feeling for me when I think back. It must have been about 15 years ago, going to Manchester Pride. And we were staying in a hotel next door to the My Little Pony convention, where there were lots of young people of all genders dressed as My Little Ponies. And I remember saying to Dan, well, at least we won't get attacked this weekend. I'm not proud of myself. But something in the, there was maybe some truth in the humor. It's like, okay, well, at least the attention's not coming on us this time. And I don't mean to minimize the awful impact that transphobes have, but what you've said is helping me understand maybe a bit more, because I just haven't been able to get my head around it. I just can't. But equally, I then think, well, I also know that in our community there is racism, there is ableism, there is misogyny. We are not immune to that. You know, having two grooms on your wedding cake does not give you a pass.
Mm-hmm.
But it's complex. And then they kind of use our own, like using inclusion to then beat us with. It's like they then call us homophobic. And I go, but no. It's like such a head fuck. And that's for me, who is minimally affected. I'm affected because of the people I care for and because I can see that this is not how I want society to go. But I'm not living that existence where it's there all the time. So again, the fact that, and again, I know it's a moment in time, but the fact that you were able to respond in those ways with such dignity, I just think one day I'll have the patience of Avi.
That's very kind of you, but yeah, I'm glad that it's behind us, and I hope that there will be a prize that would, for literary prize for queer people, because I think that is really important. So if Polari is continuing, I really am hopeful that maybe it could be under new leadership or something like that. But there needs to be huge structural changes. But would I love to see that kind of institution? Absolutely. We need it. Right? We need our stories being told, and that institution, and our stories can be told in many different ways. But that was an establishment that really promoted our stories. And even though I did not get to have my books on the shelf in the same way visibility that I would have gone, which is again ironic, right? Because the whole thing was, and again, I understand that, but the whole thing was let's fight against transphobia, and meanwhile, yeah, let's sacrifice some trans visibility where we're doing it. But I guess that was inevitable to some point. So I personally may have paid some price for that, but I get it. But overall, we want, among other ways to tell our stories, we want an establishment like that that hasn't been taken very seriously, that's been celebrated, that's been part of, literary culture. So yeah, I'm really hopeful. I don't wish ill on the institution. I wish accountability on the organizers.
How long has it taken you to become this wise? How old are you?
Come on. Well, okay, aging, right? So I think part of the benefits of aging, right, is that the world becomes a little bit more nuanced. I'm still learning and growing and fucking up like crazy. So, but yeah, I see a lot more nuance these days. I'm really grateful for that.
What's it like being the age that you are now?
It's quite shocking on some level. I mean, but shocking in good and bad ways. So in a good way, when I was young, I never thought I would make it past certain ages. So when I was really young, I didn't think I would live beyond 21. I had this idea that I won't make it to 21, and I did. And even though I had a complex relationship with my mom, she flew to the other side of the world to celebrate my 21st birthday because she reminded me that I never thought I would make it. And there were all these milestones that I hit that I thought, wow, okay, this is pretty cool. But 60 is a different ballgame. It really is. Even from just a few years ago, it's the body changes dramatically. And I'm like, what's that about? I didn't sign on for this. Nobody asked for my permission. That's not okay. And at the same time, there is a freedom to it. It's both. The heightened sense of mortality for me, reckoning with some changes around, like even the skin getting kind of more wrinkly and not bouncing back, and things that I have associated with, in general, have said very non-ageist thing. Don't see myself as ageist, but when it comes to myself, I'm being quite ageist.
Internalized ageism.
It totally is internalized ageism, and yeah, it's not simple. And at the same time, there is like this incredible, like I said before, my glasses keep falling from, so I'm just going to take them off. I feel lucky to be here and to be in a third phase of life where things are dynamic and happening. I'm now not only teaching in the US, but I'm teaching in the UK. I have community here I'm very plugged into. I'm even going to teach, and this is, if anybody's interested, you may want to check it out. I'm teaching an advanced writing course at Birkbeck. It's a short course, 8 weeks. So if folks want to, it's about long form. So it's actually about planning a book and what to do in terms of, and even if someone has that already in process, it could actually be good. So please, if you'd like, you can find it at Birkbeck. So I'm super excited that there's London is becoming more and more a very important home. So there are ways to grow and thrive in this next phase. That's how I feel. This idea of retirement is something that, I mean, if people are enjoying it, I stay, but to me, it bewilders the hell out of me. Like, I don't want this thing called retirement. I want to be constantly engaged and to be productive and to love in new ways. That's what I want.
I feel like as we get to the end of this discussion, it just sets me up with 75 things to talk about for the next one. Knew would happen, but I feel like I already knew that one conversation was not going to be enough. But I feel like that's, in a way, it's such a lovely teasing point to get to of, oh yeah, and at 60, here, just watch what comes next. Sit back and enjoy the.
Exactly. 60s with a roar. Yeah.
What, like, if you wanted people to find you, whether it's through Birkbeck, whether it's through other places, how would people find you?
My website is a good place to start. I'll put the Birkbeck link on there. I haven't yet, but it is Avi Ben-Zeev is one word.com. So yes, feel free to get in touch. There's an email there where people get in touch with me if someone has questions, and we're always happy to connect. And yes, I'll post, teaching and other links there as well.
Everyone should be buying this. My Dead Name Home, buying, reading, and buying a copy for a friend. And then a question I ask everybody who comes on the podcast, my book is called Still Here, Still Queer, Now What? If you were to finish the sentence, I'm still here, I'm still queer, and how would you complete it?
I'm tempted to go in so many different directions, but what comes from my gut rather than from my head, love fiercely and expansively. Ourselves, our planet. Yeah. Radical, radical love.
Amazing. Thank you. I'm so grateful that you've given the time to be here. I'm so grateful that you have written this incredible book. I'm grateful that you are in London because you make London a better place. And I'm just grateful for you because you're a wonderful person to know. Yeah. Even in this conversation, I feel like I'm getting to know other parts of you. And I feel like after listening to your book, I got to know a lot of parts of you. There were moments because you were reading it in my ear as well. I was like, oh.
Thank you so much, Paul, for these amazing words that go straight into the heart and for being who you are. And as I said, I can't wait to read the book. I'm so glad that it's coming out. And let's celebrate.
Absolutely. Here's to that. Thank you, Abby.